Tonight, we journey into the story of the British Empire. Sea air moves like a cool veil along chalk cliffs, while gulls wheel in patient loops over coves cut from old stone. Forests hold dew in their leaves and release a resin scent at first light. Old roads cross heath and moor, and low mist drifts over barrows where quiet memories rest. The islands breathe with tide and wind, abbey bells and river light upon bridges of worn ashlar. You feel how the shore draws mariners outward and how the hills keep hearths safe within. You might struggle to endure what they once lived through. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk a shingle beach while the tide pulls away in a slow breath, leaving pale pebbles clean and cold to the touch. On the headland, the wind tastes of salt and fennel, and sheep paths crease the turf toward a ring of weathered stones. In a cleft of rock, a faint fire breathes, and a fisherman tends nets that carry the scent of kelp and tar. The bay bends into a small harbor where masts rise like winter trees, and the quiet creak of rigging becomes a steady lullaby for the boats that dream under it. The land gathers languages in gentle layers. Latin lingers in place names and in a traveler's blessing shared where two roads meet. Norse cadence returns in a boatman's chant that keeps the oars in time. A Norman clerk copies a charter by candle, ink pooling like midnight on vellum. In the year 1066, you feel a kingdom tilt when standards meet on a Sussex ridge and the ground keeps the warmth of stamping horses. Stone keeps lift from river bends after that day, and new law settles beside old custom, as if both belong to the same long house. You cross a bridge into a market where wool bales stack higher than a man. Clothiers set crescents of shears upon planks and fold dyed lengths in sapphire and madder. Coins pass from palm to palm with a clink that sounds like rain on slate. A guildmaster lifts a tally and names ships bound for Flanders, while a boy reads a neat list by the warehouse door. You taste ale cooled in the shade of barrels, and kiln smoke drifts from a malt house to settle in your clothes with a homely warmth. Downriver, the current slackens where it widens toward the sea. A barge glides past a priory wall, and psalms fold into the water sound. Lantern light touches the face of a carver, shaping a saint's sleeve in limewood. A book opens on a lectern, and a scribe lays down thin gold leaf with careful breath. Herbs make the air both sweet and bitter, and bees find time as if guided by a soft bell. Time settles into a rhythm that serves shipwright and nun, drover and mason, and every hand trusts the measure. On a western coast, cliffs step down to coves where veins of tin run like dusk lines through the earth. Pilchards glimmer in baskets by moonlight, and a chapel candle burns beside an iron anchor set upright like a cross. Old tales whisper of traders who came from beyond the sunrise to bargain for tin, quick voices on pebbled beaches, and coins bright as shells. The story never yields a single port or a name that stands alone, and the shore keeps its secret beneath the long sleep of waves. The sea teaches with patient sternness. You learn the lean of water over chalk and clay, and you read the soft writing of clouds above the downs. In a yard that smells of oak and pitch, planks bend to a keel under steam and pressure. A bell strikes at a harbor mouth, and a pilot guides a heavy hull through shoals by sound and memory. Nets dry on racks like patchwork sails, and coils of rope keep the strength of many hands. A white cliff gleams even on gray days, a kind of natural beacon, and courage begins to carry itself like prayer. Farther north, a river port braces against winter. Smoke lies low over slate roofs, and thin ice drifts along the water with a clink like small bowls touching. A ferryman pushes off with a pole and finds the bank again with one sure step. In the yard of a hall, archers test new bows that arc like young yew trees, and the thud of arrows in the butt feels deep in your chest. A banked ember keeps a household through long nights, and you guard it as if it were a vow that must not fail. You follow hedged lanes and enter a town lit by rushes. Travelers trade news from inlets and estuaries, every name like a tide. Bristol keeps a hem of warehouses. Plymouth holds a stone quay and an inn that pours spiced wine in winter. Dover rests beneath high chalk and the old Roman lighthouse that watches the strait. Canterbury gathers pilgrims with its road dust and hymns. Each name carries a tune of voices, and each tune follows wind and current to the place where land and sea shake hands. A sign rises in simple colors. On a square of cloth, a red cross waits on white, bright even in thin rain. The cloth moves from chapel to mast and back again, and people bow their heads for reasons they shape in different words. That cross meets other banners in markets where spices bloom into the air. Clove, cinnamon, pepper. Laughter briefly loosens the sober mood when a porter sneezes near the sacks. Numbers keep order, prayer keeps meaning, and the two share a table without quarrel. You return to the headland while night flows in with a steady calm. Lanterns bead the curve of the bay, and within some mill a wheel grinds grain for morning bread. The shore keeps a low hush, and the roads gather silence. Out beyond the breakwater, a single hull rides at anchor. A chest of charts waits under cloth against the damp, and a captain studies the moon before closing his eyes to test a thought against the press of the wind. You cannot name tomorrow as trade or discovery or both. You can feel how tin and wool, prayer and law, measure and seamanship have joined hands within you and grown ready to step out across the line where darkness turns to open water. Morning takes the river gently, and work begins as if guided by an old prayer. You move through the dockyards at Deptford and Woolwich, where ribs of oak lean like the frames of cathedrals resting on their sides. Adzeys ring with even strokes. Caulking irons tap in tidy rows. Pitch softens in iron pots and gives the air a sweet resin breath. A tide line darkens the stone, and men read it like a clock. When water lifts to that mark, a hull may slide and the river will take the weight with calm hands. A carver touches a panel cut with a rose and a lion. The grain holds light like skin warmed by the sun. The craft has rules as old as patience. Measure twice, test the seam, trust the line that carries strength from keel to mast. A clerk unlatches a small chest and brings out a parchment that smells faintly of beeswax. He smooths ribbon and seal until the color sits true. The letters grant leave to seek and trade and claim, to venture in the king's name and divide the gain by rule. You hear the steady rasp of a quill and the soft sound of a seal set firm. In rooms near the quays, merchants share spiced wine and talk in low tones about northern banks thick with cod and about a western ocean that breathes through fog in long swells. Coins click on oak as if echoing the river's slow pulse. A boy warms his hands over a brazier and watches the older men count risk as carefully as coin. A compact ship named for a saint runs down the Bristol Channel with a friendly wind. You stand by the stern and watch the compass card turn with shy grace. The days grow colder. The sky lowers. The sea takes on the color of worked iron. One morning, a coast rises through haze, pewter cliffs above a forest that smells of spruce and damp earth. Men lift a wooden cross on a strand of shingle and ring its foot with stones. Charts gain a new name. The moment feels clear and simple, yet the exact beach keeps its secret inside the worn fold of memory, as if the first step liked the shelter of doubt. Back on the Thames, the dockyards thicken their skill. Long rope walks stretch away like quiet lanes, and boys pace them in step, twisting hemp while they sing to keep the time true. Founders test bronze mouths that glow like warm honey. A captain runs his palm along a culverin and nods once. In the yard chapel, a psalm rises and falls, and the river carries its cadence to the slips. On the flagstaff, a red cross wakes, folds, and wakes again, breathing like a living thing. Summer gathers along the Solent. You watch a proud hull heel with swift violence when a gust finds open ports low to the water. Green rushes across a gun deck. Drums falter and fall still. The ship settles, and the surface closes with a heavy calm. Years later, the timbers come up into light and still smell of salt, as if the sea had kept them with care. Some say a sharp turn and an untimely gust took her. Some hold that weight high in the hull unbalanced the grace of her lines. The answer moves between the two like a tide that never chooses one shore. Time turns, and a new queen moves through a hall bright with tapestries. In the yards, carpenters bend ribs with steam and lay keelsons by rules learned from fathers and masters. On a launch day, music rides the wind until the river itself seems to carry the tune. A ship takes the name of a leaping hind and leaves a silver wake on far water. You work the capstan and feel the deck live beneath your boots. Biscuit, brine, sailcloth, and sun glare become the compass of your hours. At night, the wake lays a white path under the moon, and stars hang close like seeds of frost. Coasts turn beneath the bow. The ship rounds capes and crosses belts of heat where flying fish spark in the dark like quick coins. Calm falls and then breaks. The crew keeps time with chant, then quiet, then chant again. Months gather in the rigging. When the ship returns, the river crowds to see her. A hush travels the bank before cheers. On the deck, a sword touches a shoulder. Tar and time drift together on the breeze. Some feel the treasure from that long circle steadies royal accounts and sets keels for ventures not yet named. Others sense that greater wealth lies in example, in a courage that runs along alleys and rope walks and lifts the eyes of unheard apprentices. The truth wears more than one face and walks easily between counting house and chapel. Along the Chalk Coast beacon keepers stack brush on headlands and nurse a guarded spark under dry turf. You climb a bluff and taste salt on a wind that also carries lavender from cottage gardens. Out on the gray plain, a crescent of tall sails grows. Fire ships drift with the tide and scatter confusion like embers on straw. Cannon answer across the roads with a rolling voice that does not hurry. Smoke presses against cliffs, then loosens as new wind turns its hand. Men give thanks in churches and on decks. Some say the weather speaks in favor. Others point to powder, timber, quick oars, and quiet planning. The day accepts both voices and refuses a single story. In a paneled room, a ledger opens to a fresh page that smells of iron gall. Names of coasts settle into neat lines. Guinea and the Bight find a place beside the Levant and the Baltic. There is room for ice and for heat, for storms and calms, for bargaining in cramped chambers where shutters rattle and candles tremble. A boy holds a sand shaker and waits for the nod that fixes the ink. Beside the window, a globe shows a curling passage around the south of the world and leaves a pale gap where a pencil wants to roam. New companies take form with tidy initials. A charter promises polite privileges that hide sharp intent. Scales, cloth, and careful words travel with chaplains who keep small books wrapped against salt. You step from the ledger room into a church where a slow hymn gathers the day into quiet. Light pours through colored glass and leaves islands of crimson and gold on the stone. A captain stands beneath the window and feels the weight of oak, iron, wages, and tide pass through his shoulders like water through a harbor mouth. He sets his hand on the bench and walks back into wind and talk. On the quay, a troupe rehearses a scene where a clown wanders and a prince remembers the sea as an older friend. Ballads about bold sailors pass from mouth to mouth in alehouses, and a scholar collects voyages into pages that smell of ink and damp wool. The island begins to see itself reflected in wide water, and the reflection grows steadier with each tide. Seasons ripen, and charters gather like leaves on a long summer tree. Names tighten. Privileges read as courteous favors and carry teeth beneath the ink. Factors pack scales and cloth. Masters count shot into canvas bags. Chaplains ring thin bells and bless a morning that may end outside sight of land. Purpose multiplies. Profit speaks. Reputation speaks. Faith speaks. The voices do not agree, yet they share the same deck and lean together when a squall creases the horizon. In this mingled sound, you hear the first strong beat of a realm that imagines wide oceans as a road and not a wall. You return to the waterline, where the first keel of this chapter slid free. The air smells of river mud, coal smoke, oranges, and tar. The tide turns with a muscle you can feel in your ankles. New hulls nudge outward, rudders feathering as the current takes them toward channels beyond familiar capes. Behind you, a carpenter fits a knee brace and smiles at a clean joint. Ahead, a buoy dips as if to bow to the file of ships now setting their courses. The world you carry inside no longer ends where the chart once faded. It widens by habit and by hope, and you stand ready to follow it, steady as the bell that marks the watch and patient as the river that carries every craft to sea. Dawn finds you on the Thames again, where frost feathers the warehouse eaves and breath turns white above the water. The river tastes of salt and coal ash. In a narrow counting room, a Virginia company clerk smooths a crackling map and lifts a quill that gleams in candlelight. Names gather in neat columns. Coins ring once in a wooden bowl. Talk leans toward a coast that still lives mostly in rumor, a low river mouth among reeds and mud, a place where a rough palisade might hold fast against hunger and fear, while prayer steadies the hand that sets each stake. Weeks pass in a rhythm your body learns. Ropes dry and stiffen with salt. Sailcloth booms, then folds to a quiet drape. At night, the wake draws a silver thread behind the stern, straight as a vow. You listen for the steady wind and for the uneasy hush that warns of a calm. Stars climb and tilt toward the seam where sky meets water. The North Star steadies thought when the ocean offers no landmark. Flying fish flicker like coins. A porpoise breathes near the bow and vanishes into slate-colored light. You enter the first hours at Jamestown in 1607. Pickets rise from damp ground. A bell hangs from a bough, its narrow tone gathering men for prayer and then for labor. The well tastes of grit. The air holds pine and swamp. Mosquitoes arrive at dusk like living dust. Corn grows in mounds beyond the clearing, the seed answering well to the soil when hands keep the old rhythm for hoe and hill. Canoes nose the shallows with baskets of maize and fish. Copper beads and cloth change hands while the brown river bends like a drawn bow. Winter tightens its grip. The starving time comes like a slow tide that refuses to turn. Rats vanish first. Leather softens in kettles. Those who can still stand bury those who cannot and scrape frozen earth with the last strength left in their bones. The palisade holds against cold and fear, yet the sound inside becomes small, a murmur of prayer and the thin scrape of a spoon in an empty bowl. Spring returns with ships that carry grain and firm commands. A governor reads the king's will, and order gathers itself like a cloak against the wind. Tobacco lifts its tall leaves in the heat. You roll a dried leaf between finger and thumb and breathe a smoke that tastes of pepper and honey. Barrels fill with a fragrant crop, and the river learns the weight of the new trade. Brides arrive in hired ships to join the men, and muddy paths settle into streets with tidy fences. Children run along the palisade and skip from shadow to sun. The land becomes a ledger of plots and hedges, of creeks given English names, of barns that silver in noon light. In 1619, a warship anchors near the point and lowers weary people who speak with voices taken from far coasts. Their presence marks a turn that the ledgers cannot soften. The counting rooms of London call you back. On a pewter plate, spices wait for judgment. Clove buds look like tiny nails. Cinnamon curls like warm ribbon. Pepper rolls in black grains that tick as they pour. The East India Company carries a royal charter sealed at the century's first winter, a permission bound in wax and ribbon that opens distant markets to cloth and coin. Chests of silver stack like steps at Deptford. Masters weigh anchors and tape charts across oak tables. Gentlemen read reports of safe harbors and sudden squalls and fold the pages with careful fingers. Heat presses on a road that leads to a Gujarati port. Dust lifts and settles on sandals and wheels. Camels sway past the gate with bells that chime in a sleepy rhythm. You enter a yard where bales of cotton rest under woven shade. A broker tests the weave across his knuckles and names a careful measure. Inside a quiet room, a scribe writes on thin paper while a fan turns by hand. A small seal leaves a scarlet flower upon the margin. Far inland, an emperor receives an envoy, and a page carries firmans that open storehouses and grant a place beside the river. Evening comes to a Javan roadstead. Clove trees hold their own weather beneath a high canopy, the air sweet and cool as if a garden breathed above the shore. Longboats creep between ship and beach. A chest opens to show bars of silver that shine with a cold fire. A scale tips. A tally stick accepts another notch. Outside the palisade, a market cooks rice and fish in wide pans. Children chase one another in dust that smells of salt and charcoal. The watch calls the hour from the fort, and lamps answer across the anchorage like low stars. Not every shore yields a ledger line. Years earlier, a settlement raised on a low island leaves only the marks of empty posts and a single word cut into wood. Crops once grew behind a short fence. Footprints trailed toward a distant beach, then faded where waves darkened the sand. The carved word whispers of friends across the water and leaves a hush that never quite lifts. Wind sorts sand into new lines. Pines murmur above shallow ground where stories do not rise again. A small human hope ends without a room for mourning, and the island keeps its secret under salt and sun. Homeward now. A convoy gathers in the channel. Sails climb like white hills above the water. Pepper shifts in the hold with a dry whisper. Tobacco rests in hoops that smell of citrus and smoke. Crews move with a careful pride learned over months, and songs rise at the capstan while the bows lift and settle. The river narrows to its first quays. Hammers ring from yards. Prices are named in alleys that smell of fruit and rain. A brass plate goes up over a counting door, and the city breathes as if the tide itself had taken a deeper pull. Night returns to a church near the water, where candles throw islands of gold on stone. The boards underfoot remember the step of mariners and factors who carry salt in the seams of their coats. A psalm rises and joins the hum of tide beneath the wharf. You hold 3 images together until they fit the same frame. Mud walls that keep a settlement through a hard winter. A carved word on rough timber that still troubles a coast. A charter that threads silver and spice into one design. The island gathers these lines the way a rope gathers strands and tightens them into a single pull toward distant seas. Warm wind lifts the scent of crushed cane as you step onto a wharf where barrels wear sugar dust like frost. Ropes creak. A cask leaks a slow thread of molasses that gleams like dark amber in the sun. Behind the harbor, a ridge carries windmills that turn with patient strength, their arms cutting the bright sky. The fields breathe heat. Long knives whisper through cane and leave tidy rows of stubble that smell green and sweet. A bell marks the hour at a boiling house. Copper pans hiss. Steam climbs and leaves a thin grit on your lips. You ride a small sloop along a lane the charts now call familiar. The navigation acts steady the traffic and hold it inside an English frame. Ships carry timber and fish toward these islands and return with sugar, rum, and ginger. The motion draws a triangle on water and pushes coin through counting rooms that learn the taste of overseas work. A clerk in London lays a ruler across a map and names convoy dates as if he were measuring a beam for a new roof. In the Caribbean, the calendar follows the cane. Cut, cart, boil, clarify, pack. The rhythm holds until the rain changes its mind. You reach Barbados, where the ground falls away in gentle steps and the sun carries a fierce white weight. An older crop of tobacco gives space to cane, and Dutch buyers show quick skill with credit and gear. Estates spread. A new class of planters rides from house to mill, their coats heavy with heat and their words clipped by habit. The millstones grind with a sleepy growl that never stops. Night hums with insects and with songs that learned a new shore yet keep memories of older rivers. A drum speaks in a courtyard and carries a heartbeat that will not be forgotten. Across the channel, Jamaica rises green and mountainous. In 1655, the island changes hands after a hard push by ships and regiments that have sailed out from a cold spring. Spanish towns fade, English forts climb, and coves fill with rigging that draws every rumor of quick profit. Port Royal grows in a rush of taverns, storehouses, and narrow lanes where coin changes hands faster than tide. The harbor water looks like glass until June of 1692, when earth and sea trade places in a breath. Streets fold. Cellars gape. A church bell sinks and comes to rest with its clapper stilled forever. The drowned town sleeps in warm water, and divers later find plates on wooden tables as if the meal still waits. Back in England, the Royal African Company receives its charter in 1672. A room breathes wax and wool while signatures settle onto vellum and the seal hardens. Ships now load for a coast of great rivers and wide mangrove mouths. Cloth stacks in careful bales. Beads are weighed. Muskets lie in cases with oiled locks. The air of the estuary tastes of salt and iron. The crews know the pattern. Outward with goods. Along the coast with anxious bargaining in tide creeks where mangroves hold their own silence. Westward then with the human weight that no scale can make true, across a track of ocean that keeps storms quick and calms cruelly long. You hold the rail as the sea stretches without boundary. Chains touch wood with a faint ring. The wind loses its softness. Time sinks into a heavy sameness that tries to erase days, yet the body remembers each hour. When the ship reaches a leeward roadstead, the water turns a clear blue over sand bright as bone. Boats climb and fall in the swell. Auctions begin in shaded yards, ledgers thicken, estates gain more hands for cane and mill, and the fields lengthen like long sentences. The night returns with songs shaped to soothe children who carry new names that do not fit, and the words cradle a hope that refuses to die. You walk a great house veranda that looks out over rows of canes so neat they seem drawn by a cartographer. The boilery smokes in even breaths. The still house smells of yeast and wood. Rum trickles and catches fire at a tester's touch. A table holds bowls of limes and a polished punch ladle. In the kitchen yard, a woman bakes a dense cake sweetened by sugar from the very fields that crowd the horizon. The cake will be kept for celebration, cut with laughter that wraps grief so it can be carried. Stories travel with the food. Names survive inside those stories when paper refuses them. Far up in the hills, a horn sounds from a high ridge and sends a thin call across gullies filled with fern and bamboo. A path darts through breadfruit and cedar. You follow a stream that cools your feet and find a village hidden in folds of green. Cook fires breathe a nutmeg scent. A drum leans against a stool. A carved stool shines with oil. The people here have taken new breath from wild ground and keep it with watchfulness and welcome. They speak with quiet pride and share news that moves faster than patrols. One day, a treaty will meet them on their own terms and name a boundary the map had not honored before. You spend a night by a mill where the rollers sing while a moon hangs over the yard like a coin held between finger and thumb. The foreman counts the wagons to keep pace with the boil. Sparks fly whenever the pan meets cold air. A child carries a gourd of water from the well. An old man tells a river story that begins on a coast far away and bends again at this shore. The next day, the overseer rides past and the story falls into a whisper under the wheel. Work resumes with the same fierce constancy. The sugar has its own appetite. The labor pulls every hour toward it like a tide. In an office on the Strand, a banker opens a ledger so new it still smells of paste. The island names sit in a steady column. Barbados, Nevis, Jamaica, Antigua. The figures climb in neat procession. Insurance contracts lie beneath a paperweight. A minister writes a speech that praises order and profit. On the desk, a small dish holds cubes that look like snow. The sweetness brightens tea and softens bitterness. Cups touch saucers, and the room approves the sound. Yet the numbers never tell you how much of a day vanishes into the mill, and there is no sum that contains a child's name once it has been taken away. You walk again along the sunken lanes of Port Royal in your thoughts. Windows without glass look out into green light where fish drift past pews and doorways. A watch lies still with hands frozen at a minute remembered by the sea. A town of noise and quick bargains changes to silence in an instant, and the hush never lifts completely. No record answers every question about the hour before the earth gave way. The city keeps its secret the way cane keeps sweetness inside a hard rind. People on the new shore across the harbor look out and feel both warning and wonder. Morning returns to the fields. A small boy learns to blow a curved horn so the call runs clear through bamboo thickets. Women wrap headscarves in colors that hold sunlight even in shade. Men sing a line that begins with a river they have not seen since they were children and ends with a promise made here. Sundays gather with white cloth on tables and food that brings many shores into one bowl. A preacher lifts his voice beneath a cotton tree that spreads a wide green roof. Hope rises like smoke and holds its shape against the sky. You end the day on the quay, where a ship's boat thumps against the ladder and a crate of sugar loaves thuds on deck. The captain checks the lashings and studies the sky for a fair start. The sea road waits, the planters tally. The factors close their shutters. The mill slows, then stops, and the night is suddenly deep. A cricket makes a silver sound in the hedgerow. The sweetness that fills cups in drawing rooms now glows beneath the stars beside the dark cost that bore it. The water carries both truths without raising its voice, and you stand with the hush inside your chest, ready for the next turn of the chart. Morning lays a clear light over the Thames and turns the water to pewter. You walk beside rope walks that smell of hemp and tar, while clerks carry bundles of notes that whisper like dry leaves. In Threadneedle Street, a steady rhythm gathers. The bank counts coin, issues paper, and lends a pulse to fleets and regiments. Tallies leave the exchequer with charcoal still on the wood. Credit begins to travel faster than carts, and a written promise to pay becomes a kind of sail that holds when the wind sleeps. Far north, the light meets rain over heather and stone. In Kirks and Closes, the talk is careful and long. At Leith, the tide strokes the quay with an old friend's hand. In Glasgow, tobacco fattens warehouses, and a counting-house lamp turns ledger columns to warm amber. Between the Forth and the Clyde, merchants, lairds, and burghers weigh a future that would bind two realms into one parliament. You pass through an Edinburgh close where damp walls hold their chill and hear a hope for opened markets carried low. The year becomes 1707. Articles are read in rooms where rugs soften footfall and wax cools on ribbon seals. The Union takes its chair. A banner that once showed a king's dual crowns now speaks for a single lawmaking house. The Cross of St. George and the Saltire of St. Andrew already share a blue field above royal masts, yet the sense of that cloth deepens. Some say need presses the scale after lean years and hard ventures. Others lift their eyes to trade and safety. The true mix of motives stays folded. You pass into a hall where clerks weigh taxes as if measuring grain. Receipts bind with thread. A printer tests plates for government bills and smiles at clean letters. Taverns near the exchange warm to talk of annuities and lotteries. Gentlemen speak of a national debt that ties private fortunes to a common fate. In Lloyd's coffeehouse, a bell marks news from sea, and men bend over lists to price risk with patience learned from shipwrights who trust the line of a keel and the hold of a rivet. A different memory rides the wind across a highland loch. Far away, on a fever coast at Darien, timber frames once rose for a trading town with a brave name and a brief life. Jungle leaned close. Night carried a heavy breath. Ships came home light, and families felt the emptiness where bales should have stood. Some say that failure leaned many shoulders toward union more than any speech. Others answer that the loss taught caution rather than surrender. The story keeps its shade and never grants a final sum. War speaks on flat fields where morning mist smells of grass and powder. You stand with ranks that step through smoke toward a river bend bright as polished steel. Hooves drum. Drums answer. At Blenheim, a strong position cracks under a steady charge, and news runs down cobbled roads to ports and market squares. Ramillies follows with the same adamant pace. Names of villages far from any harbor begin to matter at the water's edge, for they change the price of wheat and the color of merchant hopes. Back home, shipyards answer the wider call. The Medway and the Tyne ring with small hammers that never hurry. Oak yields a warm bread scent as planks thin to the right curve. Chaplains bless guns that sit like sleeping thunder. Rope takes tar and shines as if rain had touched it. A map on a wall gathers pins and threads. A mother folds a ribbon and a letter into linen and returns to the stove. The island learns how war, work, and finance draw one line across hearths and decks, even when the sea lies calm. You climb to a gallery that looks over the new House of Debate. Members sit in ordered rows and guide their tempers like riders with a skittish mount. Votes pass, supplies are granted. The Navy can pay its men. A boy listens and learns that lines of ink can move stores and powder across oceans. Down in the street, a ballad seller calls a tune that braids fife with pipe. Children clap against door lintels. Rhythm turns grievance to patience and patience to belonging without any need for proclamation. Night comes and a coin turns under lamplight. Silver shows Britannia seated with trident and shield, and the metal holds a small C when the flame shifts. In a coastal yard, a mason carves a rose and a thistle on the same lintel and brushes stone dust from his sleeves. The year draws to 1713, and a treaty hardens in neat clauses. Utrecht names Gibraltar and Minorca as ladders across the Middle Sea. Trade permissions widen in quiet lines that read like courtesy and change the daily work of ports. You walk a quay at Greenock, where a boy counts hulls that carry pipe staves and salted beef outward and bring tobacco inward. Bricks of the warehouses glow like banked coals at evening. In Liverpool and Whitehaven, casks roll and iron rattles with a kitchen's music. In Bristol, cranes flex with the slow grace of patient birds. Parliament learns to speak for water it has not seen, and the island lengthens its arms without raising its voice. Farther off, a regiment packs for home with boots worn soft at the toe. Profits and burdens share the same street. A widow fingers a lottery ticket and imagines a debt turned light. A merchant watches shares in a South Sea venture rise with a summer mood and fall with a winter one. Pavement keeps the echo of both tempers. Some hold such bubbles to be a stern schooling toward restraint. Others say the risk that builds wharves also builds illusions that must burst to teach their lesson. The city does not decide. It keeps weighing, writing, sailing, and preparing for wider seas. Evening settles, lamps bloom behind small panes, and the river changes from pewter to black silk. On a hill above a dockyard, a watchman hears the tides turn in the soft thud of boats against pilings and taps his staff to count the hour. You feel the realm take on a larger shape. Law finds a new room for itself. Money moves with rumor's speed. A banner that once showed a king's two houses now stands for a chamber where many accents cast one vote after another. War, finance, and union knit the islands firm. Gray dawn gathers along a channel where gulls drift like scraps of paper and anchors hold against an outgoing tide. You follow signal flags up a tall mast and hear the beat of a drum that keeps men to their work with a calm resolve. The deck smells of wet oak and salt. Far inland, frost lies across fields where hedges are bare and smoke lifts from cottages. The island steadies itself, for a wide struggle now binds farm and factory, chapel and dock, to distances that stretch from green valleys to snow-bright rivers and warm harbors lined with palms. You ride west into deep forest, where the Ohio country breathes pine and leaf mold. Paths run as narrow ribs through trees that press close like a congregation. Scouts move ahead with quiet feet. Drums in red coats sound hollow among trunks, and the echo tricks the ear. On a summer morning, fire cuts the air near a river that bends like a steel blade. Men fall among ferns, and muskets flare in bursts that vanish into smoke. A column turns back with sorrow heavy on its shoulders, and the forest closes behind it with a hush that feels older than any banner. The lesson settles into the journals of officers who begin to learn new ways in wooded ground. The sea road answers with a different patience. Sloops and brigs gather off a cold coast where fog tastes of iron and fish. You step onto a shingle beach and feel round stones shift beneath your boots. Up the hill, a fortress watches the harbor with dark eyes. Summer comes hard and bright. Cannon speak across water with a deep voice that makes glass tremble in houses a mile inland. The garrison yields at last, and fishing villages hang lamps in their windows. A map on a table in London grows lighter by one inked fortress, and the tide of the war feels a little more sure. Across the ocean, a river wide as a field reflects a high blue sky, while wheat bends on the wind above a cliff. You stand in a boat as it kisses the bank near a narrow path that climbs through scrub and rock. The night is small and the steps are careful. Sailors with ladders move in silence, and the cliff gives way to grass where dew lights your hands. Morning shows a town and a citadel on a crown of rock. Lines dress, drums speak, and two leaders face an hour that will carry their names through centuries. When the field finally quiets, a scrap of verse about the path of glory is spoken under a gray sky that begins to lift. Church bells answer across the island many days later, and a new song about hearts of oak catches on every wharf. Faraway heat rises off a mango grove where parrots lift in a startled flurry and settle again in the shade. A storm darkens the afternoon and breaks with hard rain that tastes faintly of dust. Muskets on one side fall silent, while officers curse damp powder and gunners struggle with sodden fuses. Casks on the other side open dry and ready because wax held true. In the confusion, a line breaks where it mattered most and a standard dips. When the rain passes, the grove smells green and sweet, and the soil keeps the print of boots that moved at a careful trot. After the field grows quiet, a courtroom will change hands in a city by a river, and a company factor will count revenues that once drifted in a different direction. The Middle Sea holds its own trial of skill and nerve. On a raw day of wind and spray, a fleet sights its rival near a lee shore where rocks wait under foam. You brace as the ship heels until the deck tilts underfoot like a hill. Orders run through the rigging. Sails reef and fill again. The foe tries to gain the open, yet the wind claims the channel as its own. Guns speak in rough rhythm with the sea. When evening falls, broken spars float past like torn branches after a flood. Quarters light lamps, and the battered hull smells of smoke and wet rope. The coast of the island sleeps easier that night, and the word wooden walls feels less like a boast and more like a simple truth. In a humid city on a river with tide marks on brick, a locked room fills at night with air that turns thin and hot. Men crowd together and fight for space near a small window. By morning, the count of the lost moves from paper to rumor and then to printed sheets that each claim a number that will not hold still. The story travels in ships and finds parlors and taverns where voices lower at the sound of it. The grief becomes part of the wind that fills sails for the long return, and the exact measure of that night never settles into one line that everyone accepts. Europe bears its own heavy weight. You stand on a ridge and watch wheat move like water under wind. The ground shakes to a steady march. Flags ripple. Pipes call a melody that cuts through smoke. An ally in blue turns defeat from a city with a speed that feels like cold steel drawn from a scabbard. In a letter home, a soldier writes the name of a small town that will live in his memory the way a scar lives in skin. The island reads those names in morning papers and feels courage settle again in the same chair as worry. Autumn returns to shipyards where oak bends under steam and iron rings in small sharp notes. Rope makers hum and keep even pace. Women carry baskets of biscuits into storerooms and say a quiet prayer when a boy enlists. In chapels near the water, candles burn low and steady. A hymn carries the line that men are ever true hearts of oak, and the words travel with sailors who pin sprigs of the tree in their hats for luck. Bells answer ship horns across mist as if both belong to one choir. Winter sets in, and treaties begin to grow in the minds of men who count the cost of powder and shot. In rooms that smell of tallow and wine, maps stretch across tables, while hands trace rivers, lakes, islands, and coasts. Pens move with care. North Stones and South Keys enter careful lines. A far peninsula changes masters here, a chain of forts there. Trade posts on hot shores receive new rules, written in phrases that look harmless and will shape lifetimes. You stand by a window and see snow fall in a quiet court while the year turns and the war leans toward its end. When peace arrives in the early spring, the air above the river feels washed clean. Crowds jostle near a print seller who posts a new sheet with bold letters that declare the terms. Villagers read them aloud in inns where the smell of bread and beer welcomes the hour. Canada moves into a new column. Florida shifts to a different hand. In India, a company steps from a counting house into a chamber where tax and judgment are now made under its roof. The island gains harbors and loses doubts, yet a ledger of debt lies thick and heavy as an anchor on the floor. You walk past a tax office where men emerge with papers folded like small sails. In narrow rooms, a widow counts coins beside a candle that burns too low. In a meeting house across the sea, a farmer runs a finger along a new notice and feels anger settle into the same sober temper that once built his fences. The global war has given the island new maps and new pride. Yet it has also given the realm a bill that will touch cups of tea, rolls of paper, and crates in every dock. The hinge has turned, and the door now opens into halls no one has fully seen. Night gathers on a quiet hill above a port. The masts below look like a winter grove set in silver. A child holding a toy soldier listens to a father name far places that now belong to the story of their shore. The child falls asleep before the last name is spoken. You notice how the war has taught the island the habit of thinking in oceans rather than in channels. Bells on the river mark the hour. The tide shifts in the dark with that familiar breath that never hurries. You feel the line that runs from snow at a cliff to mango shade and to a gale over a rocky bay. It pulls straight through your chest. The triumph tastes of salt and iron and also of cost, and its meaning will keep moving like a bright seam underwater. Morning opens on cobbles still wet from night rain. You pass a print shop where fresh sheets hang like pale wings and smell of ink and hot metal. A headline names duties that touch paper, glass, and tea. And a quiet crowd reads while steam rises from mugs held in mittened hands. A boy runs with a notice tucked under his cap. Church bells mark the hour with a restrained comfort that does not match the new murmur of the streets. In a dockside loft, tea chests stand ready in neat ranks, and the pale wood carries a faint scent of tannin and rope. You move through lanes where lanterns dim as dawn takes over. The harbor lies quiet, masts thin as quills against a pearl sky. Later, a hush breaks into swift motion. Boats push out like dark leaves. Oars dip. The chests rise and then tumble, lids splitting with a muffled crack, leaves spilling into black water that breathes a bitter perfume. The tide accepts the offering without judgment. A gull circles as if drawing a ring around the hour. People on the quay keep their voices low, and the town holds the memory like a hot coal cupped in both hands. Winter presses hard, and soldiers stamp their feet on cold stones. Drums beat a slow measure that sounds like an old clock. A green on the edge of a village wakes at dawn. Lines stand opposite as if viewing their own reflection in a river. Smoke thickens, and the first shots pull a thread that does not break for years. You walk fields where fences tilt and orchards stand bare. Powder speaks and then falls quiet. Feet crunch on frosted paths when the ranks withdraw, and a church door opens to hold the silence like a bowl. Summer arrives with dust and sweat. In a crowded hall, a reading from parchment ripples outward like a bell in water. The words are careful and spare, and the air smells of tallow and sun. Bells answer from steeples. Crowds breathe as one before they remember to cheer. The message travels by horse and sloop and finds kitchen tables where candles gutter in July heat. Flags appear on greens and from windows. A new habit of saluting takes shape. You fold the scene into the larger book you carry in your head and feel the weight shift inside it. Campaigns travel by rivers and along stony ridges. On a high field above a slow bend, banners brighten the day, red and blue and white held against green. A band plays a tune that keeps courage upright. An army that has learned patience and the habit of stillness closes a vice rather than rushes it open. The surrender blooms like a pale flower in late sun, and news slips into inns, farms, and parlors with the sense that a great hinge has leaned. Winter that follows tastes of salt pork and coarse bread, and ink settles into journals that try to hold meaning steady. The sea carries allies with canvas bright as cream. A harbor south and west becomes a trap held by the wind and by masts that stand in the right water at the right time. You feel the ground tremble under a slow drum as men march toward a last line of trenches. Spades move, then guns. When the field grows quiet, a sword changes hands and stories rise that will carry this hour into every parlor where maps hang on walls. The tune that played on earlier ridges returns, softer now, as if it had learned reverence. Across that same ocean, harbor poles hold ropes where flags are brought down at dusk. Windows glitter in a final sunset on a city that will not carry a garrison much longer. The Union flag folds with care on a square where dust lifts when carts roll. Ships stand out on the ebb with their yards squared. In the streets that remain, people set their lives to a new calendar. The air smells of bread and pitch and a faint sweetness from barrels that hold apples. A chapter closes without slamming the cover. You keep company with families who decide to move toward a colder shore. Ox carts creak. Sails pull against river wind. A woman wraps a silver spoon in a shawl so it will not clink inside the bundle. A man carries a family Bible and the deed to a farm he may never see again. Timber towns rise along bays that freeze in winter and blaze with maple in autumn. Tents give way to plank houses. A new province takes form by a broad river that remembers canoes. Names in parish books fill quickly, and schoolrooms open with slate, chalk, and hymns that warm the breath on cold mornings. In a stone building near a tidal river, a clerk copies the text of a law that gives room for an old faith and for a civil code kept from an earlier age. Candles burn low while snow falls outside. Parish bells ring at dusk in 2 languages, and the sound drifts across the water like woven cloth. North and east of that city, ship carpenters spread shavings on floors that smell of pine. A town gains a new name and a charter in the same season that weary families arrive with stiff hands and smoke in their clothes. The maple leaf and the thistle share a lintel carved by a patient blade. South and east across the world, a different recalibration begins with pen and ribbon. In London, a board gathers, and a new act folds a great company into closer supervision. Ledgers move from private chests to rooms with green baize tables. A clerk writes that revenue from a river plain now runs through offices where the crown has clearer sight. You step out into rain and find that carriages roll with quieter confidence when markets east of Suez begin to feel less like guesswork and more like measurement. A governor rides out at dawn past mango shade and river fog, while clerks in white linen stack reports like bricks. The ocean below the equator offers another path for the island's energy. You stand on a deck where wind from roaring latitudes presses canvas until it hums. After months, a headland lifts from haze, and bays show water as clear as glass laid on sand the color of wheat. The air smells of eucalyptus and salt. Boats shuttle to a shelly beach. Men and women step onto new ground with eyes narrowed against hard light. Tools clink in crates. A sapling fence rises. Smoke from first hearths leans in the wind. At evening, a strange chorus carries from scrub where feet thump and tails beat, a music no old song can name. Back in the tropics, a different plant waits for a journey. Glossy leaves gather dew like quicksilver. A captain counts seedlings and nods at the number. The plan promises to sweeten work on far islands by planting a tree that bears bread in its name. A cutter with a loyal crew lifts anchor and clears the outer reef. Weeks later, an argument on a quiet morning decides the course of many lives. A boat swings down. Voices carry in a careful tone. The larger ship pulls away and grows small in a bright lagoon. The journals keep their entries, yet the heart of that hour remains veiled, a disagreement that no line can fully explain. Across northern forests, people who chose the crown find places by rivers and on stony bays. Birch bark canoes skim along dark water, light as leaves. In new towns, carpenters carve thistle and rose on the same lintel, and a school bell rings at 9. The language of law takes on a local slope while resting on the old base. The sound of a fiddle brightens winter kitchens, and maple sugar hardens in pans that shine like tin suns. The memory of the old homeland softens a little in the glow from stoves and in the order kept by Sunday coats on pegs. The island learns to understand its change without surrendering its shape. In the home counties, hedgerows fill with hawthorn blossom. In city rooms, men speak of manufactures, canals, and coin with a calm that tries to be stronger than regret. The Navy drills with the same firm routine. Altars receive the same prayers for safe return. The mind of the realm turns again toward oceans that point to India, to Africa, and to the wide land under the Southern Cross. Streets near the docks smell of tar and oranges and wet rope. Shop windows show blue cloth, sextants, and maps with careful blue wash along coasts. At evening, you walk a quiet quay where gulls perch on bollards like small sentries. The river carries lamps mirrored in long ripples. You hold 3 images and let them touch one another without forcing them to fuse. Tea leaves darkening a winter harbor. A reading from parchment in hot air that tastes of dust and hope. A field where a band plays as muskets fall still and a general hands over a sword that once seemed to weigh more than iron. The island inhales, then exhales, and begins to live with a shape altered yet unbroken. Before you rest, a thought moves through the room and refuses to be fixed to a page. There is no single hour when allegiance becomes departure. There is no single word that turns argument into cause. There is only the long sound of tide moving under boats and the steady scratch of pens in rooms where law learns to live with change. The empire that looked toward a continent now looks past it again, and you feel the recalibration take hold inside your chest like a rhythm learned by heart. Rain beads along the Hooghly in long strings of light, and the tide moves with a deep brown patience. You walk beneath the spreading shade of a banyan whose roots grip the riverbank like a many-fingered hand. Calcutta breathes damp and ink, curry smoke and wet jute. Clerks cross the courtyard of the writers' building with folded papers under waxed cloth. A seal clicks shut. The year runs after 1765, when revenue from Bengal begins to flow through company rooms by a grant that turns trade into rule and coin into judgment. The city learns a new rhythm of receipts, surveys, and signatures that carry the weight of harvest and flood. You climb the steps to a chamber where language itself becomes a bridge. A judge listens to Persian pleas and Sanskrit citations, while a young scholar copies verses and names grammars as if laying stones across a river. A society for learning opens its doors, and a shelf gathers texts taken from palm, parchment, and memory. A pundit warms his hands around tea and counts syllables with quiet joy. Outside, a file of carts creaks toward a ghat where boats wait with salt, cloth, and saltpeter stacked in neat pride. The banyan leaves stir, and you feel a realm knit itself with ink as surely as with rope. Heat settles upon paddy fields that should shine with standing water. The sky holds its promise too long. A cracked well tastes of dust. Handfuls of rice pass from palm to palm with a silence that sits at the back of the throat. Villages thin and roads grow strange in their emptiness. In the hungry year that follows, accounts try to number loss and cannot agree. Some point to sky and season, others to rents and demands that did not bend, yet the ground keeps its own counsel and gives no single reason. When rain returns, it smells of forgiveness and grief in the same breath, and memory learns to walk with both. South and west, the air thickens with jasmine around a fortress where cannon look over a dry ditch. You hear drums inside walls painted with tigers and moons. Rockets scream with a feral whine and leave trails like chalk strokes across night. Columns move in careful squares through sugarcane that snaps underfoot. A gate opens at last, and a city built upon an island in a broad river falls quiet. The throne of the tiger stands empty, its cloth stained by powder smoke and rain. You breathe the iron scent of a foundry where captured guns cool, and you know that a door has closed on one house of courage while another house widens its threshold. New agreements take shape that bind princes to the company with words that sound like friendship and feel like gravity. A resident rides at dawn through a city of domes and gardens. Courtyards smell of cardamom and rain-washed stone. In the cantonment across the canal, a band plays a slow march, while sepoys lift muskets with the comfort of long drill. In a hall hung with mirrors, a signature confirms that a garrison will stand within call, and that coin will flow outward like an obedient river. The town resumes its pleasures, yet the air learns a new weight that does not lift when the music ends. You travel north upon a dust-bright road where horses sweat under white sun. A plain opens and closes again in ridges that look like sleeping whales. Standards with sun and spear stand across the field. The wheel of battle turns through morning and into the hard light of noon. A riverbank sees the last of a charge falter. By evening, a cloak lies upon a table, becomes a banner of surrender. Far off, a city of red sandstone falls under new guardianship. The emperor keeps his rooms and gardens and writes neat lines of poetry. And the fort hears a different watchword at its gates. River trade thickens as winter cools the air. You step into a godown where crates bear marks of tea and silk on one side and of a bitter gum on the other. At Patna, tall chimneys stand above a factory where pressed cakes wait under canvas. A foreman seals a chest with care while a boatman counts poles for the long drift down to the sea. On the far edge of the world, Hongs take cargo through their courtyards, and silver begins to move with a changed mind. In the counting rooms, the abacus clicks and the ledger smiles. In the alleys, a cool wind raises newsprint and then lets it fall. A dawn along the river brings quiet feet to a bank where women in bright wraps stand beside a pyre. The priest's voice threads smoke and breeze. Hands draw a widow back from the edge, then a new writ arrives and settles like a firm hand upon the hour. The right that had walked beside the river for generations begins to end in law and in practice. Motive wears more than one face. Some speak of duty to life, others of order and name, and the river accepts both stories without choosing between them. The flames sink, and the morning opens with unsteady kindness. Work grows in yards that lie between mango orchards and parade grounds. A surveyor lifts a brass instrument that gleams like a small sun and sets points that will shape roads, canals, and lines of tacks. A cartographer shades a map with careful blue along river bends. A judge signs his name under a code that brings scattered practice into one room. A teacher opens a grammar to a page that shows vowels like small pearls on a string. Children chant letters that will give them a voice in courts and markets, and their voices ring like bells across dust. Rumor begins to learn the quick paths that run through bazaars, wells, and barracks. A cartridge glistens with grease in a drill yard and leaves a taste that men read as an insult set upon the tongue. A clerk logs a complaint and a captain orders a parade. The air goes still. Months pass. The idea does not pass. It rides in carts and in songs and lies hidden in folds of cloth. Fires that look like chants begin to show a pattern when seen from a fort tower. You hold the still hour before a storm and feel how many lines have gathered through tax and treaty, through victory and famine, through reform and pride. Evening returns to the banyan on the Hooghly. Lamps wake along the Ghats and show steps worn smooth by millions of feet. A flute sings from a courtyard. A jackal calls from the brush beyond the last house. The river keeps its brown sleep and boats knock gently against stone. You carry through the darkness a ledger's precision, a soldier's march, a scholar's page, a widow's release, and a rumor that will not lie still. The company sits within these images like a merchant behind a counter that has grown into a throne, and the night does not say how long such a seat can last. Steam breathes along the river like a new kind of tide. You stand at a dock where cranes move with a slow intention that feels almost polite, iron joints gleaming with oil. A tug shoulders a brig into line and whistles once, a short, cheerful note that seems to promise the day will keep order. Smoke climbs in blue threads from funnels and hangs beneath a gray sky that smells of coal and drizzle. Far upriver warehouses open their ribs, and cotton bales roll onto carts while clerks tally with pencils bitten flat. The island learns a new rhythm set by pistons and gears, a steady music that keeps time for mill, mine, and quay. You ride a railway out of the city before breakfast. The carriage shakes with a quick shiver when the engine takes the grade, and the world begins to move like a ribbon unspooled. Fields blur. Hedges comb the wind. Smoke drifts past the window and stings your throat. Yet the breath of the engine also carries a clean promise of distance made small. Stations bloom like brick flowers, each with a clock that insists on the same minute for every town it serves. In the mills of Lancashire, cloth flows from frames that thrum in a kind of cotton rain, and a weaver touches threads that tie her to ports she will never see. The post brings a small square of paper with a queen's profile crisp in black. Gum dries under your tongue as you set the stamp, and a letter finds its way through rooms humming with sorters and clerks. Red boxes appear on corners and turn streets into corridors of promise. A child writes to a father at sea and hears the first quick footstep of a reply. The empire begins to feel not only wide but connected, as if nerves had joined muscle and bone. In Hyde Park, a palace of glass rises like a morning frost that refuses the sun. You pass through cast iron arches into a mile of crystal light, where machines churn, clocks sing, and fabrics glow like tropical burner heaven-sent brightness. A Zulu shield hangs beside a Sheffield blade. A Bengal shawl lies near a Cornish steam pump. The floor keeps a soft drum of footsteps from every corner of the islands, and from coasts reached by every wake that leaves a British harbor. When evening comes, the glass holds the last gold of day, and you feel a new confidence settle into the city like warmth stored in masonry. At sea, wood learns to share water with iron. You walk a deck that feels hard as a town street, and you lay a hand on plates held by rows of rivets that shine like small moons. The screw hums, a low, contented purr that drives the hull even when the wind sulks. A gun sits behind an iron shield and looks out with a calm that belongs to machines rather than to men. The name warrior carries more than pride. It carries a schedule, for the ship keeps appointments with weather that would once have ruled the hour. On a South China roadstead, a line of hulls rides at anchor while hills fold behind a pale city wall. A fort takes the first shot, low and angry. The reply walks along a deck in measured steps. Hours pass, then days. The treaty that grows from the smoke gives a rocky island at a harbor mouth to the flag that floats above your head, and warehouses rise in brisk rows beside a water that turns jade under noon sun. Porcelain, silk, tea, and silver change hands in rooms where ledgers smile, though the cargo that bent the first bows had left a bitterness that will stain memory long after the ink has dried. In the Caribbean, a bell rings in a chapel on a sun-bright morning, and a woman sets down a basket of limes to listen. Words read from a printed act move through the room like rain on a tin roof. The old bondage begins to end in law, then in life, slow and rough, yet real. Years pass before every chain is fully gone, and a new system tries to capture labor with contracts and years of service, but the first moment remains as clear as salt on the tongue. Songs gather names of ships that now carry families as migrants rather than as cargo. And those songs carry pride that grows like cane after storm. Cables slide into water where light turns green and then fades. A ship the size of a small town tends the line like a patient midwife. The sea tests the wire with cold and pressure, then yields. One morning in a London office, a message crosses the floor at a polite speed that defeats distance. At desks from New York to Bombay, men lift eyes from papers at nearly the same second. Markets begin to think in one breath. Admirals begin to plan without guessing winds. A line of copper sleeps on the ocean bed and turns storms of rumor into showers of fact. In Egypt, sun strikes pale stone and throws heat back in waves that smell of dust and lime. You walk beside a channel where bridges look like toys and where barges drift under flags bright as new paint. The cut from sea to sea shortens every chart. Steamers line up like geese. The island studies maps that have been strange since childhood and finds a sudden intimacy between the Channel and the Indian Ocean. Lighthouses along the Red Sea wake to a new duty, and coal depots grow like black gardens at coral shores. At home, a room in Whitehall holds maps pricked with pins and lengths of thread. A minister reads dispatches and touches a line that runs along the northwest frontier where passes twist like rope. Another thread runs across a southern ocean to a colony where wool swells in sheds as big as cathedrals. A third thread circles back to the Cape, where a dry wind lifts red dust and the road leans uphill. The lines belong to one mind that trusts steam, cable, and coin to hold what oak and courage once held alone. Evening finds you in a parlor where tea cools in bone china and a thin slice of lemon floats like a small sun. A newspaper lies open to shipping news and to a report about a narrow victory on a river bend few at the table could place on a globe. A school atlas rests on a chair back with its cloth torn at the seam. A small flag on the mantel folds itself along the staff as if tired after a long day. The empire has become a habit that touches every object in the room, from cup to clock, from lamp to rug. In the calms between voyages, a chapel near the docks fills with sailors and nurses, with engineers who smell of hot metal, and with clerks who still carry pencil dust on their cuffs. A hymn rises that thanks the giver of winds and asks care for those who now trust steam as much as sail. A nurse folds a letter that tells of a hospital tent under a strange star field, and her face holds the same quiet pride as the engineer who shows a boy how a governor keeps an engine from racing itself to pieces. Night gathers, and a thought walks beside you along the embankment, where lamps float on the river like a string of amber beads. Great power has stepped lightly for a season, and trade has marched without many drums. The peace feels real in harbors and ledgers, in wages and stockpiles of coal. The true engine behind such confidence remains hard to name, for it lives in many rooms at once, in courts and mills, in parliaments and in shipyards, and also in the desire of millions for bread, pride, and quiet. You breathe the coal-scented air and feel the island lean toward tomorrow with a measured stride that trusts the rails beneath its feet. Morning opens inside a room that smells of varnish and tobacco, a map spread on green cloth beneath mild northern light. Thin rulers rest like quiet oars. Colored pencils warm in your palm, and soft lines creep across a continent that glows the color of straw under the lamps. The year settles near the middle of the 1880s, and diplomats bend over rivers they have never tasted, measuring coastlines in calm voices. Winter air holds the faint ring of crystal against porcelain in the next room. Pins press into paper with a polite click, and boarders take a first breath that does not yet touch the ground where they will live. You follow those lines to a coast where mangrove roots lift from shining mud like black fingers. Palms thrum in a trade wind. An interpreter holds out a folded paper stamped with a seal as red as hibiscus, and a chief touches the pen with a thoughtful hand. A treaty finds its quiet place in a chest, then returns to the map in ink that dries without fuss. Canoes slide along a creek that smells of smoke and fish. Drummers rehearse for a feast near a council house hung with cloth bright as parrots. On another shore, a palace of carved walls glows by torchlight, bronze heads watching with eternal patience, while a file of men carries crates toward boats at the tide's edge. The metal keeps the warmth of hands, and the story of where such work belongs remains open like a door left on its latch. Heat presses along the lower Nile, where reeds comb the wind and the water keeps its slow brown sleep. You stand beside guns lined on a quay, while a city built of yellow stone drinks fire and powder for an afternoon, and then falls into a chalky hush. A few years later, a silver river meets sand under a white glare, and ranks in khaki move with drilled steadiness. A murmur of prayer rises against the crackle of quick-firing guns. When the smoke clears, the desert smells of cordite and dust. A war drum lies silent beside a rifle of polished wood. The river bends on, and a land that had shouted its own name now hears a new watchword at its railhead. East of Suez, the sea tastes of salt and cinnamon. Steamers nudge one another in a canal that draws a blue line between two gulfs. Coal dust clings to sweat and linen. In Cairo, a new flag hangs at a balcony, and in Alexandria, alleys breathe lime, smoke, and brine. A telegraph office taps with cheerful insistence, while a clerk dispatches prices that will set the mood in Liverpool and Bombay before noon is done. The straight cut in the desert makes every timetable across the empire tighten, and lighthouse keepers along the Red Sea learn to love and to fear that punctuality. Afternoon lifts above the monsoon plains. Rails flare like hot silver as a train runs under banyan shade and past flooded fields where egrets stand in clean silence. A viceroy rides at the head of a procession through a camp of flags and tents, the air sweet with marigold and horse sweat. A proclamation speaks in sonorous syllables and gives a new title to a queen who smiles from coins and stamps in every bazaar. Courts work under codes bound in neat leather. Clerks count souls for a census and set down the languages of a subcontinent in lines that feel both clear and incomplete. The question of whether these roads and laws rise from care, pride, or necessity refuses a single balance, and the land's answer shifts with every harvest. Far to the north, a frontier tightens like a belt along ridges of pale stone. Towers look down on valleys cut as sharply as spearheads. Stones mark a boundary across scree and snow, and wind combs the prayer flags at a pass where ponies learn to place their feet like scholars stepping between texts. Agents ride with notebooks under saddle, and letters full of coded courtesies pass through mountain forts that smell of dung fires and tea. A map at Whitehall notes a line that runs as straight as a string across a ground that prefers to fold. The line stands, yet the land keeps its right to surprise those who trust rulers more than ridges. South again, a veld shimmers under a sky as blue as enamel. Ox wagons grind their iron rims along dust that tastes of iron and sun. At Kimberley, a pit grows until it looks like a wound the size of a town, and buckets rattle on cables while men wash gravel with a practiced sigh. Diamonds gleam in the pan like drops of hard water. Telegraphs follow the same path as roads and rumor. An idea gathers that a rail might one day tie a cape to a far lake where ships rock on a high plain, and surveyors squint toward horizons that run away faster than their chains can measure. On the coast east of Mombasa, coral breaks into white foam that tastes clean and sharp on your lips. A bright locomotive waits beneath palm shadow, its brass fittings polished with love. Maasai step from the shade and watch carriages that carry the smell of coal and hot oil across a plateau where giraffes move with a grace that has nothing to do with timetables. Tracks creep through thorn and along the shoulders of hills. Work gangs sing in many tongues, and graves rise beside culverts made with patience and skill. A lake broad as a sea accepts the arrival of iron at its shore with a mild lift of wind, and the sound of a whistle begins to live beside the sound of drums and pastors' bells. In a hot room in Nairobi, a constable pins a small badge to his khaki tunic and writes his name in a register with careful letters. Far away on a cricket ground in Bombay, boys mark a crease with chalk and tap wickets into place beneath a banyan that gives a good shade for spectators in white. On a veranda in Lagos, a glass of tonic water fizzes gently, its bitterness cut with lime, and the evening breeze smells of charcoal and fresh-cut wood. Afternoons across the map begin to learn the same hour from clocks that agree, yet each place keeps its own breath, its own way of listening to that minute. Evening gathers in London for a jubilee that throws bunting across streets and sets gaslight trembling on polished harness. Crowds fold into one another with the contented press of a harvest feast. Navy blue and scarlet move like small tides along the mall. A choir lifts a hymn that praises a realm built on seas and law, and the chorus lives in the chests of men who remember fields and gales from long voyages. In drawing rooms, walnut gleams, tea steams, and conversation turns to explorers with photographs pinned to boards like butterfly wings. The island looks at the world's face reflected in glass and feels tall on its heels. Not all triumph wears bright colors. In Gold Coast Forest, the air tastes of sap and rain, and a carved stool, heavy with meaning, sits under a cloth. A column advances along a road that the forest would prefer to close at once. The stool keeps its gravity while lightning runs through the canopy. Names added to dispatches become part of a shelf that few readers touch with more than their eyes, yet the story of that seat's dignity endures in the pride of those who kneel near it. The place where respect meets ambition does not hold still long enough for a neat sentence to capture it. Night falls over the equator and over the channel with equal calm. In a post office, a clerk closes the ledger and lays a paperweight on the final page, a small globe trapped in glass. The empire at high noon glows along the edges of atlases in quiet libraries, yet the light already inclines toward late afternoon, a change so gentle that few notice it. You step back into the London street where lamplight folds into fog, and you carry the day's images like coins in a pocket, warm from the hand. A hall in Berlin where lines first found their poise. A desert where river mist met the dry rattle of guns. A veranda where a bitter drink cooled under a slice of citrus. A palace far inland where bronze faces waited for their next chapter. The meaning of that brightness still moves, and sleep takes the question without trying to close it. You wake to a thin frost on coarse grass that runs to the horizon under a sky that holds no cloud. Wire hums along low ridges and flashes in first light like a string of hard dew. A picket fire keeps a patient glow beside a kettle that smells of chicory and smoke. Men in tired khaki tighten puttees and test the straps on saddles. Ponies stamp and blow soft steam. Beyond the dark humps of kopjes, a small column moves, as quiet as a herd of springbok. The day feels stretched tight as a drumskin, and every sound settles into its own frame before it fades. The first months do not favor the flag that rises above your camp. December of 1899 takes a grim title after columns falter at rivers and passes that look modest on a map and merciless in dust and heat. Telegrams click into London offices with a rhythm that chills tea in cups. The island studies shop window maps and learns the names of towns it has never tasted on the tongue. Confidence bends without breaking. Trains leave at dawn with more men and more horses. The metal clatter of wheels and links sounds like a long resolve spoken in iron. Sieges grip the land like winter on a marsh. A town called Ladysmith holds out through rain and thunder for 118 days. Relief marches come, pause, and move again with a faith that keeps its ember alive even in downpour. Far off, Kimberley waits with glitter under the soil, while shells make lazy arcs that still find roofs. Mafeking draws a ring of trenches and keeps its heart with jokes, drill, and a parade ground rhythm that refuses to sink. When that last town opens its gates after 217 days, whistles and rattles shriek in streets across the island, and joy pours out faster than the news can pace it. The war changes its temper. Lines and squares dissolve into movement, learned from riders who read the land at a gallop. Commandos slide between blockhouses with the ease of wind through grass. Farms burn after barns yield grain and fodder. Smoke stands blue against afternoon light. Rail lines carry armored trolleys that rattle past culverts where new stone shines. The army answers with wire strung between small forts on ridges, with columns that sweep in arcs, with scouts who smell dust and study shadow as carefully as maps. A new color takes the field. Red gives way to cloth, the color of dust that fades into thorn and rock at a mile. Magazine rifles cough with a quickness that folds into the ground wind. Smokeless powder turns battle into a study of sound rather than of white plumes. Gunners dress their pieces with a precision that looks almost tender. A heliograph throws sunlight between hills like a silent bird, bright and brief. At dusk, a bugle call holds the day in its last notes, as if cradling it before sleep. Camps rise for families gathered from farms the columns cannot protect. Tents and low huts spread along dry riverbeds where thorn trees grow. Water wagons groan. A school tent opens with slate and chalk and a hymn that warms breath on cool mornings. A nurse wipes a brow while a kettle sings on a small iron stove. Rations line up in measured portions that do not fill the bowls. Reports arrive from a visitor who writes with spare force about thin faces and empty pots. A commission follows with ledgers and questions. Figures in later books do not agree about how many lives end under that canvas, and the ground refuses to yield a sum that eases the heart. The purpose behind that system stays unsettled in memory, pulled toward necessity by some and toward harder intent by others, a weight that the Veld still carries in its silence. News travels faster than boots. Photographs reach parlors where children point at wagons and at broad hats pinned on one side. Letters arrive with pressed sprigs of grass and dust folded into creases. The island learns the taste of new words and sounds their edges with care. A hymn for those at sea gains a quiet verse for those on land, far from the smell of tide. In pubs near docks, men raise pints for towns they have never seen, and glass rims catch gaslight like small halos. Across the oceans, volunteers answer from dominions and colonies. A rider from New South Wales touches the brim of a soft hat as he swings down from a wiry horse. A trooper from the prairie checks the sling on his carbine and smiles with easy reserve. A boy from Dunedin learns the smell of the karoo and writes of it in a neat hand that makes dust feel like home for a page or two. Indian stretcher bearers move with steady grace and keep their heads level through stones and thorn. Scouts from African communities read Spore and The Shade Under Mimosa with a wisdom that turns ambush to safe passage more than once. On a cricket ground half a world away, boys mark a crease with chalk and copy the stance of men they have never met. A narrow river by a poplar grove sees a last hard exchange that leaves the air tasting of cordite and cold tea. A messenger rides through the night with a paper sealed in wax. Morning gathers officers in a farmhouse where sun finds dust in the air and turns it to gold. The Treaty of Vereeniging takes its place on the table on the last day of May in 1902. Terms gather into calm phrases that fold flags, grant allowances, and promise a road back for farms that stand black and bare against the sky. The guns fall quiet, and the veld exhales. Weeks pass. Blockhouses empty. Wire comes down with a faint twang. Carts carry families to plots where chimneys stand alone like stone bones. Seeds arrive in sacks with stenciled letters. A plow finds old furrows, and the soil remembers its line. Children chase each other around the stump of a burned pear tree and laugh as if laughter could make branches and shade return. In town, a tailor mends a jacket and sets a new button in place with hands that have learned a soldier's quickness and a father's patience. Churches open their doors to the same hymns that carried men to set sail years before. London takes in the news with a steadiness that hides its own relief. Bunting lingers at corners longer than usual. A wounded man studies a shop window and sees himself not as a hero, but as a piece of work that needs finishing. A woman who rolled bandages listens to the calm splash at her sink as if hearing the end of a long storm. Newspapers argue in neat type about lessons for a century that has only just begun. The railways breathe a slower breath. The Navy resumes a school routine at sea. The Empire considers what victory has purchased and what it has pledged to pay in years to come. You sit by a small fire under a sky bright with southern stars that seem closer than northern ones. The night smells of dust and wild garlic. In your pocket lies a shined cartridge case found near a dry stream bed. In your head lies a question that never quite sleeps. Triumph and sorrow share the same camp, and the path between them changes with every retelling. The scattered burn marks on the veld, the small graves near culverts, the flags folded on farmhouse tables, and the cheers that race through a far city after a long siege carry meanings that do not hold still. Whether this struggle planted the first tender shoots of a union that would later knit a nation, or whether it planted something more divided and stern, belongs to a story that walks beyond this firelight. The night accepts both thoughts and keeps them together under the same quiet stars. August light lies thin on station glass, while paperboys raise chilled voices that carry names of cities you barely know how to place. A poster shows a stern mustache and a finger that seems to touch your chest. You cross the platform and smell steam and oranges in a soldier's kit. Brass buttons glow like small suns. The island breathes in time with the piston stroke, and regiments roll toward a continent that waits with trenches already sketched in the mind. You ride a ferry at night with lamps hooded and the sea the color of wet slate. The air tastes of salt and oil. On the far coast, a column files inland under a sky that holds a thin milk of stars. At Mons, a line bends and learns the art of falling back without collapse. Boots darken in canal water. The rifles sound crisp and patient, and the road to the Marne opens like a belt unfastened under pressure. Autumn fixes the front to fields whose names become a catechism for years to come. You step into a trench cut through chalk and clay. A brazier pops. Tea tastes of smoke and iron. Rats move with shameless ease along the duckboards. Letters arrive in mud-stained hands. The ground shakes when a barrage walks forward with steady feet. The smell of turned earth, cordite, and wet wool slips into your hair and stays. Small blessings carry weight. Dry socks, hot stew, a moment of quiet. Morning on the Somme has the stillness that comes before a large door opens. July begins with whistles and ladders. Men step into light and into a wind that smells of crushed poppy and chalk dust. Lines move, falter, and lie still. By afternoon, the field looks as if heavy rain had scored it, crater touching crater, and the day writes itself into memory with a pen that scratches bone. You try to hold steady the thought that courage can live beside misjudgment without losing its shape. Gray seas take up the story. You stand on a dreadnought's deck where paint looks like frost and the bridge smells of cord and varnish. Wireless crackles like insects. At Jutland, the horizon is a low bruise and the guns speak across miles as if across a courtyard. Shells walk along the water with blunt feet. Evening finds the fleet counting its wounds and its pride. The question of who holds the victory moves like mist and never quite settles on one ship. At home, the night sky hums with engines that sound like a slow organ. Zeppelins drift, black shapes above chimneys and parks. Wardens call for lights to be shrouded. Children sleep in cellars and wake to talk of holes punched into roofs like open mouths. Women fill factories with the rhythm of presses and lathes. Their overalls carry the smell of oil and soap. Conscription begins and turns choice into duty, and the island accepts it with a quiet that surprises even itself. Faraway cliffs rise sharp from a bright sea. You stand at a narrow cove where water beads on rifles and the sand gives way to scrub that tears at the cloth. The day at Gallipoli begins in cold and ends in heat. Steep ground eats breath. Boats return light. Songs carry the story of that shore into evenings under southern stars. Some who walk those ridges keep a private belief that a single hour turned wrong, and that a smaller change might have opened the straits like a lock gate easing on its hinges. Another front unrolls along dust and stone. You feel the heat lift from rails in the Hayaz and watch a small train stop at a cut where stone looks like loaves. Camels move with a patient grace that feels older than war. A city of old pilgrim roads sees banners rise and fall. Jerusalem changes hands in a winter light that makes limestone glow. In a London office, a short letter carries a promise to a people scattered and waiting, and the meaning of that promise keeps more than one face, each carried with solemn conviction. Mud returns to claim attention. Around Ypres, the ground drinks shells and then refuses to let them go. Passchendaele becomes a word heavy with water and with the tired lift of a boot that does not want to leave the earth. Horses flounder. Duckboards vanish and reappear. You meet men who can describe every tone of rain as if naming instruments in an orchestra. The thought that a ridge might hold the safety of ships at sea keeps the attack alive longer than any song. Factories increase their breath. A convoy system knits the Atlantic into a moving wall that defeats the cold logic of the prowling wolf. In a ward that smells of disinfectant and starch, nurses learn a new discipline that belongs to the century of steel, masks, and measurement. A siren's rising tone sends men to shelters with a calm that rests on habit rather than fear. Your eye catches the first small red flower pinned to a coat in November, and you understand the power of a simple petal to carry the voice of a field. Spring of 1918 tightens the chest like a hard belt. The front bows under a fast pressure that runs with fog and low cloud. You hear a new thunder in deeper notes from guns moved forward with ruthless skill. Town names pass through dispatches like beads flicked on a string, and the map looks pale where it should be dark. Summer answers with steadier breath. Tanks cross fields like patient beetles. At Amiens, a line that had been taut begins to relax, and a general on the other side calls it a black day for his army, the phrase cold and exact. Armistice comes like the end of a long-held note. At the 11th hour, you stand in a street where smoke from chimneys rises without hurry. The city holds its breath, then cheers in a voice that sounds tired and joyful at once. In Whitehall, a simple block of stone receives wreaths and silence, and the 2 minutes fold the nation into one thought. A coffin from an unknown trench travels through lines of people who take off hats and bow heads, and the sound of shoes on stone becomes a kind of prayer. Peace carries its own weight. In Paris, pens move across heavy paper while a clock ticks without sympathy. Mandates bloom on maps like pale blossoms pinned to unfamiliar stems. New frontiers find straight edges where rivers and tongues prefer curves. A ship unloads soldiers into a city by the Golden Temple, and a crowd gathers in a garden walled with brick. Shots crack like whips. The ground holds a number that pages will never match with comfort. Explanations refuse to agree, and the echo follows every later speech about duty and justice. At home, influenza opens its invisible hand and touches door after door. Curtains stir. Church bells toll more often than anyone can keep count. You walk past houses where chalk marks sit near the lintel with a mute steadiness that chills the blood more than gunfire. Yet the island keeps moving. Widows open shops with a stubborn grace. Children chase hoops in alleys that smell of rain. A small paper poppy brightens a black coat and saves the day from drowning in gray. The dominions return with new voices. On a cold ridge at Vimy, a nation writes a sentence in stone that begins with sacrifice and ends with self-respect. Along a harbor under a Southern Cross, a day of remembrance becomes a kind of second birthday. On a Veld town green, 2 languages share a plaque. The empire recognizes that loyalty now speaks with accents that ask to be heard, and the crown feels both steadier and lighter on that account, a balance that needs care rather than command. Night deepens, and you sit with a cup that is cooled. You hold 3 images until they touch. A mud-soaked ladder at dawn on the Somme. A gray sea that has not decided who may claim the word victory. A quiet stone in a London street that gathers flowers each year like a patient garden. The crown still rests on familiar brows, yet the weight of it has changed. Pride and grief take turns on the same chair. What the war gave to unity and what it gave to independence will never accept a single line, and the room grows quiet as you learn to live with that gentle refusal. Clouds ride a wind from the west, and lamps go dark behind curtains that hang like soft armor. You walk a street where sandbags sit under windows, and tape crosses quiet the tremble of glass. A siren climbs, holds its breath, and slides away. Wardens tap doors with batons to steady anxious hands. The island braces for a second storm that begins not with sails on a horizon, but with engines, searchlights, and maps crossed by black arrows. You stand on a chalk beach where small boats shoulder the tide as if carrying a town on their backs. Diesel, rope, and wet canvas mix with the salt. The sea keeps a highway of white foam from pier to pier. Overhead, slim wings tilt and turn above pillars of smoke. Boots fill with sand, then drain. Helmets gleam like pewter in thin sun. By evening, more men stand where morning held fewer, and trains take them inland to bread, tea, and beds made by strangers with neat hands. A quiet resolve settles in kitchens where kettles tick and curtains breathe. Autumn hardens. Balloons float like gray moons above rooftops. Gun crews thump a patient rhythm you feel in the ribs. You look up and catch bright threads knitting white seams across blue. In a cramped cockpit, a pilot reads a turning dial while his tea cools at a field far away. In the city, embers fall like fruit from a black tree. Fire watchers hold their line with leather buckets and steady breath. Morning finds the great dome on Ludgate Hill still standing with soot on its cheeks, and radios in kitchens carry a voice that keeps courage low and level, like tide against a seawall. Across the sea, a desert smells of cordite and hot dust. A line refuses to yield beyond a railway town whose name fits easily in the mouth. Petrol dries the tongue. Heat shivers above the track. One determined week turns the map like a mason laying firm courses of stone. At El Alamein, the long road along the coast begins to run in the right direction and keeps running. Sand gives way to harbors, and harbors open to islands and to a boot-shaped peninsula where bells ring at unexpected hours. Farther east, a port wrapped in jungle wakes to sirens that sound too soon. Guns point toward the wrong water. Airfields burn. A banner that once seemed unanswerable grows thin against the light. In February of 1942, the keys change hands at Singapore, and the water around the island turns quiet with a silence that carries forward for years. The word empire loses some of its shine in that quiet, and courage learns to live without it. On a road fringed with bamboo, the ground drinks monsoon. You walk beside men whose boots and sandals both leave prints that fill with brown water. Mules slip. Leeches find warm skin without shame. Villages move news in whispers and pass it by hand like bowls of rice. A general studies a green map streaked with ridges and learns patience from rain. The air smells of rotting leaves and wood smoke. By slow inches, a supply path opens across mountains that had refused any road. The jungle allows the hour to pass only when it chooses. Back in the city, blackout cloth folds like night itself. A ward on the river tends burns and broken bones. A nurse with soot on her cheek smooths a blanket and shapes a smile that holds. Ration books grow soft from use in coat pockets. Gardens behind terraced houses lift beans and cabbage and a few lucky tomatoes. Jam jars line sills like small sentries. Dance halls float like rafts under bands that play a little louder than the hour allows. Pretending turns into strength and moves through the walls like warm air after rain. Ships ride gray water in guarded files. A destroyer shoulders a swell and flicks spray that tastes of iron. Far west, an escort carrier launches small planes with wings that fold like seabirds. Crates open to reveal engines that throb with confident hearts. Lend-Lease crosses the ocean in the same breath as letters between friends. The winter of 1943 feels less hungry than the one before, and factories learn to keep their rhythm through night, while lookouts watch a horizon that finally stays empty. You step onto a beach of pale sand that squeaks beneath boots. The air smells of seaweed and powder and fear buried under duty. A wall of cliff rises where a map had shown only careful lines. Engineers cut paths through wire. A chaplain kneels for a breath and then shoulders a stretcher. By night, the shore holds a forest of masts where morning had shown only surf. Roads inland begin to collect towns whose bells ring for a new hour. Hedgerows part for tanks that move like slow animals with patient steel bones. At home, a river of flags crosses a parade square beneath plane trees. Prison gates open with a tired creak. In a city on the Rhine, a dark cathedral stands above a plain of ruin. Radios speak of surrender. People sit down where they stand and cry without knowing why. A parish bell near a gasworks finds its best voice and rings until the clapper grows hot. The island breathes and listens to a clock that now points toward the Pacific. Summer elsewhere shines with a different light. Two cities to the east receive a new kind of fire, pale and terrible, that topples walls without warning and turns shadows into scars on stone. A war that crossed jungles and coral lagoons falls quiet. The world inhales as if it had held breath since the first engine turned over. Relief arrives with a companion that does not leave. The companion is fear of what such light could do if anger found its hand again. Across a brown river, a railway platform groans under a tide of people who carry bundles tied with string and tins dented by travel. A flag of saffron, white, and green rises where another flag had flown, and a flag of green and white finds its own wind beside it. Trains depart heavy with hope and with grief that refuses sleep. Streets fill with garlands and with flames. Homes appear and vanish in the same day. The birth of two states begins with a cry that will echo for generations. The railway keeps the sound, wheel on rail, hour after hour. A cabinet room in the old city smells of paper and tea. Leaders sign their names with hands that tremble from lack of sleep rather than doubt. Outside in warm rain, people sing and embrace and mourn in the same minute. Soldiers who once saluted a single crown now guard new gates and new seals. The viceroy's house sheds a title and keeps its stones while peacocks call from the gardens. A thin line on the map looks final in ink and wavers in dust and field and lane. The famine that had darkened Bengal only 2 years before refuses to live inside a single sentence. For weather, market, convoy, and command, all left marks that do not fit into one cause. Across another shore, a walled quarter by a golden shrine remembers a promise written in the last war and carried into a mandate that tries to hold peace and cannot. Columns of families walk roads lined by olives and cactus. Convoys wind through hills that keep ancient dust. The end of rule there does not bring an end to worry, and the weight of earlier vows moves beneath later claims, like a spring under rock. Night settles on the Thames with the peaceable smell of wet stone. The dome that kept its dignity under flame now reflects moonlight without smoke. You hold 3 images until they find their order. Small boats that saved an army, a city that would not bow to fire, flags rising in 2 new capitals, while trains groan under the burden of change. The realm has endured a second firestorm that shook loose more than it saved, and the heart of that loss and that courage beats on in rooms where tea cools beside ration books and in ports where gulls wheel above ships that still find their tide. Early sun turns the Thames to pale honey, while cranes idle and gulls hang in still air. You walk past newsstands where headlines carry the sound of a new season, Ships tie up with a tired grace. On a quay, a steward lifts a suitcase that still smells of salt and tobacco. The war has ended, yet the tides remain busy, and the island listens for a softer rhythm that will guide work and hope without the old commands. You stand on a dock at Tilbury, where a long hull rests against fenders that sigh. A gangway lowers and a crowd appears with coats too light for the chill. Calypso jingles from a small radio, and a man grins as he lifts a trumpet case like a promise. The ship's name sits on her bow as neat as a signature. New hands carry toolboxes and hymn books and photographs tucked into Bibles. A woman sets foot on British timber and whispers a greeting to the city she has known only in songs. The welcome is warm and also uneven. Boarding houses close doors as often as they open them, yet the music finds rooms that want it, and the scent of spiced stew moves into streets that once knew only boiled beef and tea. Far away on a Gold Coast, the air smells of cocoa drying in the sun. A square fills with drums that speak in clean phrases. A flag with a black star climbs a white pole and takes the morning with it. The Union flag folds with care. Children clap and stamp their feet in sandals that throw dust like incense. Old men wipe eyes. A leader speaks with a measured joy that carries across the crowd. That day becomes a doorway. Others follow along, forests and savannas and high plateaus. Names leave the red wash of schoolroom maps and step into their own light. Offices change seals. Courts change letterheads. Troops parade under new colors, while bands keep the same sturdy marches that bridged many years. In the tropics of Asia, rain slants across palms and tin roofs. A rubber estate breathes that green smell which belongs to wet bark. A column moves along a red road and leaves prints that fill with water. A campaign fights among vines and ridges, while radio sets whisper through canvas walls. One side wants to break estates and rail and rule. The other wants to calm the map and keep food moving through markets. When the guns fall quiet, the estate still creaks, the rail still glints, and a new anthem lifts at dawn. The long argument about what truly ended the fighting never sets in one chair. Some say civic patience and village councils. Others say surveillance and hard patrols. And the jungle keeps its own counsel in soft breath and shadow. On a green ridge east of the rift, pines shift in wind that smells of coffee blossom and wet dust. A town hall prepares for an hour that will close a long chapter and open a difficult one. A Union flag slides down a rope, a new flag climbs, and a cheer rises that sounds like rain on 1,000 roofs. The memory of an emergency lingers in the air like smoke after a distant burn. Oaths once taken under trees, camps once set in valleys, files once kept in dusty rooms, all stand nearby in thought. Papers in future years will argue about the weight of punishment and of care, and the truth moves between them like light through leaves. You step into a cabinet room where ashtrays cool and the smell of paper rests like linen. A map of a narrow canal lies under a ruler. Ships queue in a photograph that seems to hum with heat. Voices speak in low tones about passage and pride, about oil and law, about allies who look toward the same sea and yet do not hear the same clock. When the first jets lift from carriers, the island feels old confidence wake, and then feels it falter. A telephone rings in a distant capital, and a pressure that is not shell or storm finds the government where it sits. The pull back leaves a bruise the color of late plums. Whether that hour marks the real turn from empire to something looser never finds full rest, for the change began an earlier and also continued long after. The canal returns to its long, bright line, the ships resume their measured dance, and the country looks at itself in cool water with a new patience. A market off Ladbroke Grove fills with steel pans that shine like hammered moons. The beat warms the chest and loosens feet. Women wear head wraps bright as marigolds. Men dance in jackets that throw light like fish scales. Children ride on shoulders and wave paper flags. Behind the joy lies the grit of earlier nights when cobbles had echoed to the wrong kind of shout. The carnival answers with music and food and a crowd that will not thin, and the scent of jerk smoke joins the summer air like a neighbor who decides to stay. In another season, a convoy pulls to a halt on a tarmac that smells of rain and kerosene. Families step down with trunks tied by webbing. A boy holds a cricket bat wrapped in a towel. A woman carries a pressure cooker and a small tin of cardamom. Officials stamp passports with crisp clicks. Rooms in Leicester and Harrow and Birmingham fill with the sound of kettle whistles and new lullabies. Shop signs bloom in fresh alphabets. Curry houses open beside chip shops, and late evening streets gather a fragrance of cumin and malt vinegar that makes strangers smile at the same time. You walk past a gray stone office where clerks revise the rules that once measured who belonged by empire's old cords. New acts write the terms of entry and of nationality in cool legal lines. The pen gives order. The heart lags and catches up. In the park, a mosque's dome glows at dusk while nearby a steeple keeps its hour. A hall where the Queen once opened parliaments of dominions now welcomes a family of independent states that meet as equals. A new secretariat begins its work with calm desks and a clean brass plate, and the word Commonwealth gains a tone that belongs to friendship more than to force. The southern end of Africa breathes a dry wind that smells of dust and winter grass. A colony that had once seized its own title begins the long walk back toward a settlement that will grant a new birth under a name drawn from stone houses beside a bright river. Sanctions bite, talks lengthen. A conference room in London hosts late nights where tea grows cold and ash settles. A final paper carries signatures that tense hands can barely hold straight. A flag with 5 colors rises under a sky that suddenly feels very wide. The jubilant field also holds shadows that will need years of sun. Along a Caribbean quay, a steel band tunes in early light while fishermen stack traps that smell of salt and wet rope. A small nation prepares to lower one flag and raise another. The breeze lifts sequins on dresses hung in windows. A governor's pen writes the hour in a ledger and closes the book with care. That night, the water reflects new colors all the way to the reef. In schoolrooms the next morning, children draw the new emblem on rough paper and hum a song that will get easier with practice. At home, a Saturday shopfront shows football on a tiny television. The crowd inside carries many accents and one mood. Scarves lift, a striker darts, a cheer climbs like one voice. On Sundays, the same street holds a procession that moves past halal butchers and bakeries that smell of anise and honey. Brass bands practice in church halls. A tabla keeps a patient rhythm beside a violin that learned reels before it learned rags. The island's old stone keeps its cool dignity while new threads weave into the shawl. Evening settles with a slow lavender light along the embankment. You pass a phone box where voices of many cities now come and go through wires that seem to hum with the world. A bus sighs to a stop. A school group crosses with bright bags. You hold 3 images until they sit together without strain. A flag with a black star rising under clean morning sun. A convoy of jets above a desert canal that turns every gaze back upon the island that sent them. A parade where pans ring like bells and grief becomes music that says we are here to stay. The measure of belonging remains open, like a door at twilight that invites light from both sides. The realm learns to live with that open door, and the breeze that moves through it feels like change and also like home. Mist rises from the river and drifts among bridges that remember every age. You walk the embankment while lamps blink awake in a pale morning, and a red bus sighs to a stop with a gentle hiss. Newspapers rustle with talk of trade and borders, of neighbors and seas, of friendships kept in new terms. In quiet rooms, you hear the measured scratch of pens that try to bind a fresh understanding around a house that has grown in many directions, and then learn to live with looser walls. On a cold ocean wind, you feel the pull of distant islands where sheep graze above cliffs and kelp curls in heavy surf. Ships turn their bows south, and a small war tests resolve like a winter gale. The names of bays and ridges move through radio sets in kitchens where kettles tick. Weeks later, the breeze around those islands smells of peat and salt, and the long routine of watch and guard settles again. Back in the city, a generation learns how quickly pride can stand, and how quickly grief can enter a room without knocking. Rain polishes black stone in a square as crowds gather for a ceremony that chooses silence over speeches. Poppies bloom on lapels. Traffic breathes in a softer tempo. The cenotaph keeps its simple authority, and the unknown soldier remains the island's quiet center. Later, school groups shuffle past a gallery where a sea of red ceramic once filled the moat like a memory made visible. Each flower carried the weight of a single life, and the sight still returns to the mind whenever the year leans toward its hardest days. Your path turns east along a harbor where towers catch light like clean blades. In the summer of 1997, a flag descends from a tall staff, and another rises under a sky that holds its own weather. A city built on commerce and quick speech moves into a new calendar and keeps working phones and ferries with the same brisk grace. The handover joins the island's long practice of departure, with the hope that agreements and habit can carry ashore across years that no one can measure in advance. Morning opens in Belfast under high cloud. Murals keep watch over streets where doors now stand unbarred. In 1998, pens touch paper and promise that ballots and councils will hold the labor of argument so that rifles can sleep. The city learns to braid its days with care. A visitor sits in a cafe and hears laughter that would have been rare in an earlier decade. The Accord never claims perfection. It offers a path that needs walking, stone by patient stone, and in that walking you feel the relief that follows long nights. In Edinburgh and Cardiff, chambers take their seats, and voices learn to shape law with accents that carry mountains and sea. The island thickens its sense of self by giving rooms to its parts. Trains cross a border that does not show in the fields. Stornoway light catches on rain that moves like silver thread. A football ground in Swansea shakes with joy on a spring evening. The flag remains one cloth while each corner stitches its own pattern with renewed patience. Summer returns to London with banners flaring along the mall. The year 2012 opens a stadium like a bright bowl, and the night carries a hum that sounds like brass, drums, and countless feet keeping time together. Villages of athletes rise by the river, and a flame circles the city in quick hands that hold the same fire without owning it. For a season, the old imperial capital feels like a harbor for the world, and the world enjoys the welcome. The memory remains as a warm echo in station tunnels and in parks where children chase each other through sprinklers under benevolent skies. You pass a street where a curry house breathes spices into cool air and where a chippy spills the good smell of vinegar. A sari rustles beside a tweed coat, and a headscarf catches light on a bus-top deck, while a school blazer glows with a house color under drizzle. The language of the island now carries words that came by ship and by plane, and in return, it travels out again through songs, films, and science. A cricket match at Lord's turns quiet between overs, and a boy in Lagos or Lahore follows the same rhythm from a phone small enough to hide in a hand. The city that keeps finance in its bones still counts in a tempo set by bells and by screens. In the square mile, numbers gather with a precision that recalls rope walks and keel lines, and the market breath remains tied to seas that once held convoys and clippers. At the same time, museum rooms fill with visitors who pause in front of bronzes taken from a palace that guarded meaning before a crate ever touched it. Talks about return and sharing grow patient and sometimes tense, and the right form for dignity keeps its distance, close enough to glimpse and far enough to resist simple capture. A statue in a harbor city enters the water and rises again on a crane while crowds argue across bridges and on screens. Some feel relief as if a window had been opened. Others feel a wound pulled wider. Streets carry placards that ask for better stories, for fuller names, for a place where courage and damage can stand in the same light without either one being erased. The island listens to its children and to its grandparents and keeps the conversation moving, sometimes with ease, sometimes with a hitch in the breath. One June day of 2016 leaves a paper in every hand and a number in every mouth. The island chooses to loosen ties to a continent, yet keeps ferries and flights, keeps studies and holidays, keeps old neighbors across a narrow sea. A new vocabulary settles in, customs lanes and backstops, protocols and goods that move as if stepping stones had been set across a stream. The choice sharpens identity in some hearts and unsettles it in others. And the work of making that choice livable continues in committees, in warehouses, and in kitchens late at night. A twilight year draws a long line of people past a silent coffin under the tall vaults of a hall that has watched kings and wars. The island says farewell with poise to a figure whose years outlasted storms, and then crowns a new hand that has waited its turn with patience taught by centuries. Choirs sing in old stone, trumpets wink, and a realm looks forward with the same caution and hope that once sent keels past headlands. Flags that once marched together now meet at ceremonies that speak of service and common threads rather than command. Evening falls along the river. Children kick a ball between willows. A bell across the water marks the hour. You hold 3 images and let them rest together. A harbor night when a flag changed in wary calm. A marble hall where signatures promised ballots instead of barricades. A summer when a flame circled the city in friendly hands. The empire's shape now lives as memory, as custom, as friendship, as argument, as food and song, as careful law, and as a horizon that refuses to sit still. The ending does not fit on one date, and the inheritance does not fit in one word. You walk home through lamplight that turns the pavement to warm gold and feel the island breathe in time with the tide that has always kept its steady pull. Night settles like a shawl drawn with quiet hands. Streets empty of voices until only footsteps of late walkers remain, hollow and slow, then fade. Along the river, the lamps lean over their reflections, and the water moves in long, unbroken strokes as if brushing sleep across the city. Gardens slip into darkness, hedges turning to soft silhouettes, roses closing their last brightness in the cool. On distant hills, sheep make pale commas in fields that rest, and low clouds carry the faintest glow, a memory of daylight kept for comfort. Windows give off a honeyed haze, and inside those rooms, the old world and the new sit together in easy silence. A kettle cools on a stove. A book lies open, but unread. Photographs of grandparents in careful clothes keep watch from mantels, while laughter from children earlier in the evening still seems to hang in the curtains. Somewhere a hymn lingers inside stone that has heard it for centuries. Somewhere a cricket bat leans by a back door and smells of cut grass. The air tastes faintly of tea and dust and summer rain. You breathe more slowly now. The names of ports and rivers and valleys slide away from their edges and become one gentle geography, a cradle of tides and fields, of voices that learn to share a table. You feel the weight of the past change into warmth, like a hand steady on your shoulder, not pressing, only blessing. The night deepens, the city and the countryside turning to the same quiet color. Bells will come in the morning, and markets will stir, and ships will lift their ropes, but none of that asks for your attention now. Your eyelids grow heavy, and the whole long story settles into still water and starlight. And now you may drift into dreams of history. End of script. Sweet dreams.